I don't want you to seal up your coop completely when the winter starts because that can actually lead to a lot of problems with moisture, which you don't want. But you do need to think about the type of bedding that you're using and how it's insulating your coop. Especially if you live in an area where it gets really cold, this is definitely something you need to think about. So let's talk about it. Hello friends, welcome to Chickenlandia. My name is Dahlia. I'm a backyard chicken educator, also known as the president of Chickenlandia. Raising chickens has been the best way for me to find peace and joy in my life, and I want to help you find that too. You see that camera right there, Navarro? This is Navarro. You see that camera right there? That's the camera that you broke. Cost me a lot of money to get it fixed. That was you that did that because you wanted mealworms so bad and you went crazy. It's true. It's that one. Okay, I'm gonna put you down. One thing I know about Chickenlandia is that it is not the only place on earth. There are places that get way colder than where I live. And I don't spend time in these places. I do not go to these places, but I know they exist because I've seen them on TikTok. So one of the easiest ways that you can insulate your coop in the winter is by being mindful with what bedding you're using and using that bedding strategically so that it creates more insulation for your coop. Okay, I'm actually inside my coop now because it's just super loud outside because the guys are using their equipment next door. But anyway, what I'm saying is you can use bedding in a way that adds extra insulation in your coop and makes it nice and cozy for your chickens. But it does depend on what kind of bedding that you use. And so I'm gonna go down all the different kinds of beddings and I'm gonna talk about the absolute worst bedding that you can use in the winter and then go to what I think is the absolute best bedding you can use in the winter, which I think might surprise you. So let's get started. So the absolute worst bedding that you can use in your coop, especially in the winter, is actually not bedding at all, but a lot of people use it as bedding, and that's why I'm mentioning it today. Hay is animal feed that is meant to be used if the animals don't have access to pasture. It is not absorbent. It can create moisture. It can create mold. It can get just like wet and soggy, especially if you live in a place where there's snow or a place where there's a lot of moisture in the winter. You really don't want to use it as bedding inside a chicken coop. It's not that it's like super dangerous to be around chickens at all, but I would not be using it as bedding because it can just create an environment that is ripe for disease for chickens, especially when it's cold and wet outside. Now, one thing you can do if you have an area of your run that is nice and ventilated, you can stack the hay bales up and that can create extra insulation in your run. And that is a good way to use hay. It will occupy the chickens, they'll peck and scratch at it because they like it. There is some concern that hay can lead to impacted crop in chickens. That is true if they eat too much of it. They can have a hard time digesting it. Now, one thing that I always think of when I hear of problems with impacted crop is that usually a healthy chicken that has the right bacteria in their crop will be able to break those kinds of things down, especially if it's foliage, if it's plant material. If you don't want to take that risk, then don't use hay at all, even for installation. I wouldn't be like super worried about chickens being around hay at all, but I wouldn't use it as bedding inside the coop. Okay, so here is the second worst bedding that you can use in your coop, especially in the winter time, and this is gonna make some of you guys mad. You're gonna get mad at me, but I just want you to hear me out, okay? Just hear me out. It's sand. I am not saying that there's nothing good about sand. I know a lot of people really like it, and I think they like it the most because they can go into the coop with their pooper scooper or whatever, their little like litter scooper, and clean the sand up very easily, and they just like that. They like to be able to do that daily if they want to. That being said, definitely in my area, sand is not great because it's just too wet. And what happens is that when it's wet outside, chickens can come into the coop and then carry some moisture inside with them. If there is bedding in the coop that can absorb some of that moisture, then usually that's okay. A little bit of moisture that they're tracking into the coop will be okay, but with sand, you just can't control that as much. And so I found that sand is really not something that I want to use. The other thing is that it's just cold. Like sand is cold in the winter, okay? It's just not very insulating. So for those two reasons, and also because sand is so permanent, like if you have issues with ammonia in your coop, or if you end up with respiratory issues or some other kind of disease in your coop, sand is so permanent, it's like, it's really hard to remove once you have it in your coop. Whereas if you have another type of bedding, you can just remove that and start over, which is exactly what you need to do if you're having a problem with ammonia or with disease or with external parasites. So that's why I'm just not a huge fan of sand. I know a lot of you love it, and guess what? If you're using it and it works for you, go ahead. Okay, what? Yes. Go ahead. Oh my God. What is going on? Do not have to be rude like that to her. Anyway, if you're using sand and you love it, go for it. You are still welcome in Chickenlandia. Okay, so the next level up from sand when it comes to winter bedding for your coop are pine and aspen shavings. And I'm grouping these together because they're very, very similar. They're wood shavings. They work great, and they're widely available, especially pine. Aspen's a little bit harder to find. It's a little bit more expensive, but pine shavings are just like the tried and true bedding for a chicken coop. You can find them anywhere. They are very reasonably priced. They're gonna be absorbent. You are going to be able to do deep litter with them, which we're gonna talk about more in a little bit. And if you end up with an issue of ammonia, or if you end up with an issue of disease, it's very easy to clean all of those shavings out of your chicken coop and start over, which is really important. Now, one concern that people have brought up to me about pine, and I completely understand this concern, is that it has some of the same properties that cedar shavings have. And the reason why many people recommend against cedar shavings is that the oils, the properties that are in it, could be irritating to a chicken's respiratory system. So there is some thought that pine may have some of those same risks. What I will say about that is that I've seen the studies that people refer to when they're saying that there is a big risk with pine. When I look at those studies, the one thing that I notice is that they're not on chickens. Unless there's been a new study on chickens, I have not seen one. The studies I have seen are on rats that are under constant exposure to pine in a very controlled area that is probably not going to be as well ventilated as a chicken coop. And also chickens hopefully will be able to leave their chicken coop and have access to the outside. That may not be as true in the winter, but still it's just going to be a different type of environment and a different type of animal living in that environment. The other studies I have seen have been on humans who are working in like a mill setting or a setting where they are making furniture or something like that, like a factory setting. And in these settings, the pine wood is being cut and worked, and there is this dust that is constantly in the air, and people are getting exposure to this dust that is circulating through the air. That is extreme exposure, it's prolonged exposure, and it is not the same, I'm really hoping, as the environment in a chicken coop, where yes, is there some dust when you're opening up the pine shavings and you're sprinkling around, there's going to be some dust that will settle after a little while. If chickens are in there pecking and scratching, they're going to generate some dust, but it's not going to be circulating through the air 24/7. And again, your chickens will hopefully have very good ventilation in their coop, and they'll also have access to the outside. So considering the accessibility of pine, the price of pine, I have used pine many times throughout the years for my chickens. I'm really just not ready to kind of throw it out yet. I think that it's a risk I'm willing to take if you decide I don't like the sound of that and I'm not willing to take that risk. There are so many other options, and I'm going to talk more about those options. Okay, so the next level up from pine and aspen shavings is chopped straw. I absolutely love chopped straw in the chicken coop, especially in the winter. It is very cozy. You can really make a nice comfy layer of it in your chicken coop. You can use the bales and stack them up in your chicken coop if you have a big chicken coop to create more insulation that way. I just think it's so nice and cozy, and it breaks down really well when you are using it for deep litter. Now, chopped straw, it can be kind of dusty depending on the brand that you get. I was reading somewhere somebody was saying like, oh, chopped straw isn't dusty at all compared to pine shavings. I'm like, what? Like, I will literally, there's so much dust when I am dumping it out into the chicken coop that I'll have to like leave the coop and then come back. Like when you're dumping it out, it really does generate a lot of dust. But I think that there's so many positive things about it that it kind of negates the dust that it creates. I just think it's great and insulating and wonderful for the chicken coop. Now there are some concerns about straw developing mold. There are some concerns about straw developing bacteria. What I would say to that is that if your coop is nice and dry, you should not be having trouble with these things. If you are having trouble with these things, you clean it all out and start over. And if you continue to have trouble, then you can move on to something different. But I think it always comes down to making sure that there's not too much moisture in your coop. Really, no matter what you're doing, no matter what bedding you're using, if there's too much moisture in your coop, you're in danger of there being mold or some other kind of bacteria developing in there, and you don't want that. So just keep an eye on the moisture level. Okay, the next level up from chopped straw is my personal favorite. It's not the number one bedding that I'm going to mention today, but it is my personal favorite, and it is hemp bedding. I don't think it's any secret. You guys know I absolutely love hemp bedding. I use the bedding from My Favorite Chicken. That's my favorite brand. I've been working with this company for a really long time, and I absolutely love their bedding. It is very high quality. But you might notice that I don't have hemp bedding in my coop right now. I've got pine shavings in my coop right now, and that's because there was a glitch in the matrix. Julie came in and helped me with my coop this past weekend, and I forgot to tell her, use the hemp, don't use the pine. And the reason I wanted her to definitely use the hemp this time is because hemp bedding is so good for the deep litter method. Now, if you don't know a lot about the deep litter method, I'm going to talk about that at the end of this video. Basically, very quickly, it is creating a composting system within your coop. And you can do it if you have a really small coop, and you can do it if you have a big coop like mine. One of the great things about it in the winter is that that composting material generates heat. So if you don't do the deep litter method any other time of the year, I really do recommend doing it in the winter, because you're going to be creating more heat, more warmth for your chickens during that time, and it can be better for them. You know, they'll just stay nice and cozy with that deep litter method going on in their coop. So that being said, I am going to use some of this hemp right now, and I'm going to actually add it on top of the pine shavings, because you can do that. You can cross the streams. It's okay. So it needs a little freshening up here. So I'm going to do that right now. So the main reason why hemp bedding works so well for deep litter method is because it is very absorbent. It is the most absorbent bedding that you can get as far as I'm concerned. So what that means is it's going to work very well to control the moisture in your coop in the winter time, which is so important for the deep litter method, because if you have too much moisture in your coop and you're trying to do deep litter method, that can kind of be a recipe for disaster. You really need that moisture to be controlled. And the other thing is that even though hemp bedding is more expensive, it's definitely more expensive than the other beddings out there, it's going to last twice as long because it is so much more absorbent. So if you can afford it, it can last you the whole winter. Even if you're not doing deep litter, it will last you longer than any other bedding out there. That is why a lot of people will be like, well, I'm willing to make that initial expense, because it actually ends up being cheaper in the long run. The other thing about hemp bedding is that it is low dust. You see me here dumping out the bedding, and I'm just standing here and I'm not choking. That's because there is very little dust coming from the bedding as I'm here spreading it around the coop. And that is definitely a plus, not just for you, but definitely for your chickens. So those are all the reasons why I love it. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the number one bedding for the winter. The number one bedding for your chickens in the winter to make your coop nice and cozy is the type of bedding that you can afford. That is the number one bedding for your chickens in the winter time. For some people, they can get a hold of dried pine needles. Those work really great as bedding as long as they're nice and dry. Other people can get a hold of lots of dried leaves. Again, as long as it's nice and dry, then you can use it as bedding in your chicken coop. Even grass clippings can be okay in your chicken coop if you're making sure that they are nice and dry. Now, with these types of materials, you're gonna have to keep an extra eye on them and make sure that they're not developing mold, that they're not developing moisture, but I think that you can do that. They're gonna break down really well. You can also mix these materials with whatever kind of bedding that you can afford. You can mix it up and that'll be fine. You know, of course I have my opinion on what the best products that you can use for your chickens are, but the most important thing to me is that there are less chickens in factory farms. That's what's gonna be best for chickens, and that's what's going to be best for humanity. And I don't think, no matter what type of bedding that you're using, that chickens would choose a factory farm in the winter over their chicken coop that you have given them. So I just want to leave you with that. Okay, I said I was going to talk about the deep litter method. I have a whole video about it. It explains what the deep litter method is, how you can do it. It also tells you how to troubleshoot some issues that you might come up with. It is on the screen right now. And guess what? Of course, it's 100% friendly. Backyard Chickens, education and entertainment. And I know you're gonna love it.